The Chicago wind whipped through the downtown streets as I stood outside the imposing glass building that housed my father's law firm. At 25, I should have felt confident walking into any building in this city, but this one always made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. The brass nameplate read Richardson and Associates, and seeing our family name etched in gold never failed to remind me of everything I wasn't. "You're late, Sarah," my father's assistant, Mrs. Henderson, said as I approached the reception desk. Her tone was neutral, but I could hear the subtle disapproval that seemed to follow me everywhere in this building. "Traffic was terrible on Lakeshore Drive," I explained, smoothing down my blazer, the one professional outfit I owned that didn't scream struggling artist. David Richardson emerged from his corner office, his silver hair perfectly styled despite it being nearly 7 p.m. At 58, he commanded respect in every room he entered, his 6-foot frame filling his tailored suits with the kind of authority I'd always envied. His steel gray eyes scanned me from head to toe, and I could practically see him cataloging everything wrong with my appearance. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of controlled disappointment, "I hope you've given serious thought to what we discussed last month." We walked into his office, past the wall of framed law degrees, accolades, and photos of him shaking hands with politicians and business leaders. The Chicago skyline stretched out behind his mahogany desk, a constant reminder of the empire he'd built from nothing after immigrating from Ireland as a young man. "Dad, I've been thinking." "Good," he interrupted, settling into his leather chair. "Because I've spoken with Judge Martinez about getting you into Northwestern's law program. It's not too late to salvage this phase you're going through." Phase, that's what he called my photography career, the thing I poured my heart into for the past 3 years. The thing that kept me up at night, not from stress, but from pure creative passion. "I'm not going to law school," I said, the words coming out more firmly than I'd intended. His jaw tightened. "Sarah, you're 25 years old. When are you going to stop playing with cameras and start building a real career? Look around you."
He gestured to his office. "This is what success looks like."
"Security, respect, a legacy. What if I don't want your legacy?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. The silence that followed felt thick enough to cut. Outside, the evening rush hour traffic hummed far below, but in this office, the tension was suffocating. "You're being stubborn," he said finally. "Just like your mother was, my mother." Elena Richardson had been a painter before she married my father. I'd found her canvases hidden in the basement when I was 12, beautiful, vibrant pieces that showed a side of her I'd never known. She'd given it all up to be the perfect lawyer's wife, hosting dinner parties and managing charity galas. She died in a car accident when I was 16, taking with her any chance I had of understanding why she'd abandoned her dreams. "Maybe being stubborn isn't such a bad thing," I whispered. "Sarah, I'm trying to help you. This photography hobby of yours, it's not sustainable. You're living in that tiny apartment in Logan Square, barely making rent. Is that really the life you want?" He was right about the apartment. The radiator clanked all night. The neighbors upstairs sounded like they were training for the Olympics at 3 a.m., and I'd been surviving on ramen and coffee for weeks. But when I looked through my camera lens, when I captured that perfect moment of human emotion or natural beauty, none of that mattered. "I won a contest last month," I said quietly. "The Chicago Tribune photography contest. My photo of the homeless veteran outside Union Station, it's going to be published." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Pride? Surprise. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Contests don't pay bills, Sarah. They don't build retirement funds or provide health insurance." He leaned forward, his voice softening slightly. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying this because I love you, and I don't want to watch you struggle your entire life. But what if I succeed? What if I actually make it? And what if you don't?" He stood up, walking to the window. "What if you wake up at 40 with nothing to show for it but a box of photographs? What if you end up like those artists in Wicker Park, waiting tables at 50 and calling it authentic living?" His words hit me like physical blows. This was the conversation we'd been having in various forms since I'd graduated college with a journalism degree instead of pre-law. Every family dinner, every phone call, Every chance encounter downtown ended the same way. "I just want you to have a good life," he said, still facing the window. "A stable life. The kind of life your mother and I worked so hard to give you. But what if this is a good life for me? What if this is what makes me happy?" He turned around. And for the first time in the conversation, he looked tired rather than angry. "Happiness is a luxury, Sarah. First, you build security. Then, if you're lucky, happiness follows." I stood up, grabbing my camera bag from the chair beside me. "I can't live my life based on your fears, Dad." "Then don't expect me to watch you fail," he said, the hardness returning to his voice.
And
"Don't expect me to be proud of choices that go against everything I've tried to teach you." Those words followed me out of the building, down the elevator, and onto the busy street. The November air bit at my cheeks as I walked toward the Ale station, but I barely felt it. Don't expect me to be proud. The sentence played on repeat in my mind as the train carried me home to Logan Square. That night, I sat in my cramped apartment, editing photos on my ancient laptop. The images from a recent wedding shoot glowed on the screen, moments of pure joy, love, and human connection frozen in time. This was what I did, this was what I was good at. But as I worked, my father's words echoed in the background. A box of photographs, waiting tables at 50. Don't expect me to be proud. Outside my window, Chicago stretched out in all directions, full of dreamers and strivers, people chasing their passions and people playing it safe. I was just one of millions, but that night, I felt more alone than ever before. 6 months later, spring had transformed Chicago from a gray, wind-swept wasteland into something resembling hope. The trees along the lakefront were budding, and people were emerging from their winter hibernation, ready to celebrate survival of another brutal Midwest winter. I was celebrating too, but for different reasons. "Sarah, this is incredible." Maya Chun, the editor of Chicago Life magazine, spread my prints across her desk in the trendy River North office. "These shots from the Southside Community Garden project, they tell a complete story. You can see the hope, the struggle, the community coming together." I tried to keep my expression professional, but inside I was doing cartwheels. Maya was known for her tough standards and even tougher reviews. Getting her approval meant something in this city. "I spent 3 months with them," I explained, pointing to a photo of Mrs. Washington, an 80-year-old woman who'd organized the entire project. At first, they were suspicious of me, another photographer wanting to exploit their story. But Mrs. Washington eventually let me help plant seeds, and that's when they started opening up. And this one. Maya held up a shot of 2 teenage boys, former rivals from different gangs, working side by side to build a greenhouse. "This is Pulitzer material, Sarah. I'm not exaggerating." The assignment had come through Marcus Rodriguez, a freelance journalist I'd met at a coffee shop in Pilsen. He'd been struggling to find a photographer who could capture the real story behind the community garden initiative, not the sanitized version that usually made it into mainstream media, but the raw, honest truth of people trying to change their neighborhood one plant at a time. "I want to offer you a staff position," Maya continued. "Senior photographer. It comes with benefits, a steady salary, and your own office." My heart pounded. This was the validation I'd been working toward for 3 years. Financial security, doing exactly what I loved. Wow. Yes, absolutely yes. Maya smiled. "There's one condition. We're doing a feature on emerging artists in Chicago, and we want you to be interviewed as part of it. Channel 7 is partnering with us for a segment that'll air during their evening news program, television." My stomach dropped slightly. "What kind of interview?" "Nothing too intense. They'll ask about your background, your artistic process, maybe touch on what drives you as a photographer. The whole piece is about young Chicagoans making a difference through art." I thought about my father, probably sitting in his office at that very moment, disappointed that I hadn't called him back after our last argument 2 weeks ago. He'd heard through family friends that I was still playing with cameras, and had left a voicemail asking if I was ready to be realistic yet. When would this air? Next Friday evening. Prime time slot during the 6 o'clock news. Next Friday. I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I'll do it." The next week flew by in a blur of preparations. I moved into my new office, a small but bright space with enormous windows overlooking the Chicago River. For the first time in years, I had a steady paycheck, health insurance, and business cards with my name and title. Sarah Richardson, senior photographer. I called my college roommate, Jessica, who now lived in Portland with her architect husband and their 2 kids. Sarah, oh my God, congratulations. I'm so proud of you, she said, and I could hear genuine excitement in her voice. You know what this means, right? You were right all along. You believed in yourself when nobody else would. Well, not nobody, I said, thinking of the small circle of friends and mentors who'd supported me over the years. But it definitely felt like swimming upstream sometimes. Have you told your dad? I'd been dreading this question. Not yet, I don't know how. Sarah, you just landed your dream job. You're about to be on TV talking about your success. If he can't be proud of that, then the problem isn't with you. That evening, I finally worked up the courage to call him. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. Sarah, is everything all right? You usually don't call this late. I'm fine, Dad. Actually, I'm more than fine. I got a job offer. A real job. Oh.
His tone was cautiously optimistic. What kind of job?
I took a deep breath. Senior photographer at Chicago Life magazine. It's a staff position with full benefits. Silence. Dad? That's good, Sarah. I'm glad you found something stable. Something stable. Not I'm proud of you, or congratulations, or even tell me more about it. Just acknowledgement that I'd found something stable. There's more. They're featuring me in a story about emerging artists. I'm going to be interviewed on Channel 7 News. Next Friday, television. Now his voice carried a hint of concern. Sarah, be careful what you say. These things can be taken out of context, and you don't want to say anything that might hurt your professional reputation later. Professional reputation. Always his first concern. I'll be fine, Dad. This is a good thing. This is what I've been working toward. I hope so. Well, I should let you go. I have an early meeting tomorrow. After he hung up, I sat in my new apartment. I'd been able to afford a better place in Lincoln Park with my new salary and felt the familiar weight of his lukewarm response. But this time, something was different. This time, I realized that his inability to celebrate my success said more about him than it did about me. The interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, to air Friday evening. I spent Wednesday night researching the other artists who would be featured, preparing thoughtful answers about my work and my vision for using photography to tell important stories about Chicago's communities. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly. Typical April weather for Chicago. I dressed carefully in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, professional but not stuffy, artistic but not unprofessional. As I walked into the Channel 7 studios downtown, I thought about all the times I'd watched the evening news with my parents, never imagining I'd one day be on the other side of the camera. Sarah Richardson, a young producer with a clipboard, approached me in the lobby. I'm Jennifer Walsh. Thank you so much for doing this. We're really excited about this piece. The studio was smaller than I'd expected, but impressive nonetheless. Banks of lights, multiple cameras, and the familiar news desk I'd seen on television countless times. The anchor, Patricia Morales, was reviewing notes when I arrived. Sarah, I've been looking forward to this interview, Patricia said, standing to shake my hand. I've seen some of your work. It's remarkable. You have such an eye for finding humanity in difficult situations. We settled into comfortable chairs in front of a backdrop of the Chicago skyline. The cameras rolled, and Patricia began with the standard questions about my background and training. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. Sarah, your work often focuses on communities that don't usually get mainstream media attention. What draws you to those stories? I thought about Mrs. Washington and her garden, about the homeless veteran whose photo had won the Tribune contest, about all the people who trusted me with their stories. I think everyone deserves to be seen, I said, looking directly into the camera. Photography isn't just about capturing beautiful images, it's about capturing truth. And sometimes the most important truths are found in places where people aren't usually looking. That's a mature perspective for someone so young, Where does that wisdom come from? The question caught me off guard. I thought about my father's disappointment, my mother's abandoned paintings, my own years of struggling to find my place. I think it comes from understanding what it feels like to be underestimated, I said quietly. When people don't believe in your dreams, you learn to look for the value in things others might dismiss. You learn that worth isn't always visible on the surface. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. And what would you say to other young people who are struggling to pursue their passions despite pressure to choose more traditional paths? This was it. This was my chance to speak to everyone who'd ever felt like I had, everyone whose dreams had been called phases or hobbies. I'd say that the people who love you might not always understand your path, but that doesn't make your path wrong. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is believe in yourself when nobody else will. And sometimes, if you work hard enough and stay true to your vision, you can change their minds. The interview continued for another 10 minutes. But those were the words that would matter most. Those were the words that would change everything. Friday evening, 6:15 p.m. The golden hour light filtered through the tall windows of my Lincoln Park apartment, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors as I paced nervously around my living room. The familiar opening jingle of the Channel 7 evening news played on my television, the sound both comforting and anxiety-inducing. I'd invited Maya and a few other colleagues over to watch, transforming what could have been a solitary, nerve-wracking experience into a small celebration. The coffee table was laden with takeout containers from my favorite Thai restaurant on Clark Street, Pad Thai, green curry, and spring rolls alongside bottles of wine that Maya had insisted on bringing to mark the occasion. The apartment felt smaller with 5 people crammed into my modest living space, but their presence was exactly what I needed. Maya sat cross-legged on my vintage leather couch, a glass of Pinot Grigio in hand, while James from the magazine occupied the armchair, and Lisa and Derek from my photography collective had claimed spots on the floor cushions I'd hastily arranged. "You look absolutely fantastic on camera," Maya said, raising her wine glass toward the television screen where a commercial for car insurance played. "Seriously, Sarah, very natural, very confident, like you were born for this." "I don't feel confident at all," I admitted, running my hands through my hair for what felt like the 100th time that evening. I checked my phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, the screen lighting up to reveal no missed calls, no new messages, particularly nothing from my father. Not that I'd expected any 3 years of strained conversations and disappointed. Size had taught me not to hold my breath for his approval. The familiar theme music returned as the news program moved through its usual segments with methodical precision. First came weather, with meteorologist Tom Davidson promising a warm weekend ahead. Then traffic, with aerial shots of the Kennedy Expressway's predictable Friday evening congestion. A story about Mayor Johnson's latest budget proposal followed, complete with footage from a city council meeting and sound bites, from aldermen expressing their carefully measured opinions through it all. I found myself barely listening, my attention divided between the screen and my phone, between the conversation flowing around me and the anxious monologue running through my head. What if the interview had been edited poorly? What if I'd said something stupid? What if the whole thing made me look like a naive kid playing at being an artist? Then Patricia Morales appeared on screen, her silver hair perfectly styled, her burgundy blazer crisp under the studio lights. She looked directly into the camera with the practiced authority of someone who'd been delivering news to Chicago for over 2 decades. "Coming up after the break," she announced, her voice carrying that distinctive blend of warmth and professionalism that made her one of the city's most trusted journalists. "We'll meet some of Chicago's most promising emerging artists, including a young photographer whose powerful work is changing how we see our city's forgotten communities and the people who call them home." The room erupted in excited chatter, but I felt my stomach drop. Hearing my work described in those terms, powerful, changing how we see, felt both thrilling and terrifying. It suggested a level of impact and responsibility that I wasn't sure I was ready for. During the commercial break, my phone came alive with notifications. Text messages poured in from college friends who'd apparently set reminders to watch. From cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, from former colleagues. At the corporate photography studio where I'd worked before taking the leap into freelance documentary work. Each message carried genuine excitement and support. Sarah, watching Channel 7 right now. So proud of you. Can't wait to see the interview. My photographer friend is going to be famous. The support felt warm and genuine, wrapping around me, like a comfortable blanket, but there was still one voice I was waiting to hear. One opinion that mattered more than all the others combined, despite 3 years of trying to convince myself otherwise. Here we go. Maya said as the familiar Channel 7 logo swept across the screen and the program returned from commercial break. The segment opened with a carefully curated montage of my photographs, each image lingering on screen for several seconds, while soft, contemplative instrumental music played underneath. Seeing my work presented this way, professionally lit, expertly framed, broadcast across Chicago's airwaves, felt completely surreal. These were images I'd captured in forgotten corners of the city, in community centers with peeling paint, and corner stores with handwritten signs, in pocket parks where children played while their grandmothers watched from folding chairs. Now they were being broadcast into hundreds of thousands of homes across Chicagoland, carried by radio waves to suburban living rooms and downtown condos, to retirement communities and college dorms. The montage moved from a black and white portrait of Mrs. Washington tending to her tomato plants, her weathered hands gentle against the delicate stems, to a color photograph of children playing in the spray from an opened fire hydrant, their laughter almost audible through the still image. Then came the shot of the community garden in full summer bloom, rows of vegetables and flowers tended by residents who'd transformed an empty lot into something beautiful and life-giving. Then I appeared on screen, and my stomach clenched so tightly I thought I might be sick. Television had a way of making everything feel more official, more permanent, more consequential. This wasn't just a casual conversation in a coffee shop or an interview for a small neighborhood magazine. This was me, on the record, talking about my work and my beliefs to potentially hundreds of thousands of people across the greater Chicago area. I watched myself sitting in Channel 7's studio, positioned in front of a backdrop featuring an artistic rendering of the Chicago skyline at sunset. I was wearing the navy blue blazer Maya had helped me pick out, paired with a simple white blouse and my grandmother's pearl earrings for luck. The studio lights had been surprisingly bright and warm, making me squint slightly during the actual taping, but on television the lighting looked perfect. Professional, intentional. Patricia's voice carried the professional warmth of an experienced broadcaster as she introduced me to her audience. Sarah Richardson is 26 years old, and in just 3 years since graduating from Northwestern's journalism program, she's become one of Chicago's most compelling documentary photographers. Her work focuses on communities and individuals who often go unnoticed by mainstream media, bringing dignity and artistry to stories that might otherwise remain untold. The camera cut to me, and I watched myself answer Patricia's first questions about my artistic process, my inspiration, and my vision for using photography as a tool for social awareness and community engagement. I looked more composed than I'd felt during the actual interview, when Patricia's questions had felt simultaneously probing and supportive, challenging me to articulate things I'd only half understood about my own motivations. On screen, I saw myself explaining how I'd started volunteering at the community center, how I'd gradually gained the trust of residents who'd initially been suspicious of yet another outsider with a camera wanting to document their lives. I talked about the importance of collaboration rather than exploitation, of sharing not just images but stories, of ensuring that the people I photographed maintained control over how their narratives were presented. It's not about me imposing my interpretation on their experiences, I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I remembered feeling. It's about creating space for them to tell their own stories, with photography as the medium rather than the message. Maya squeezed my arm, her fingers warm against my blazer sleeve. You're explaining it perfectly, Sarah. This is exactly what your work is about. But I was already focused on what came next. Remembering Patricia's follow-up questions, The way she'd leaned forward slightly when she sensed there was more to explore. Beneath my carefully prepared answers, then came the moment that would change. Everything, the question I hadn't fully anticipated, despite all my preparation. That's a remarkably mature perspective for someone so young, Patricia had said, her eyes intelligent and curious behind her wire-rimmed glasses. This level of wisdom about human dignity and storytelling, where does that come from? What experiences shaped this approach to your art? On screen, I saw myself pause, my eyes flickering away from the camera for just a moment as I considered the question carefully. I remembered that pause, remembered feeling the weight of honesty, the temptation to give a safe, professional answer versus the pull to say something real, something that mattered. I think it comes from understanding what it feels like to be underestimated. I finally answered, my voice quiet but clear. When people don't believe in your dreams, when they question your choices or dismiss your passions as impractical, you learn to look for the value in things others might overlook. You develop an appreciation for worth that isn't always visible on the surface. You understand that everyone has a story that deserves to be heard. Because you know what it's like to feel like your own story doesn't matter to the people whose opinions you value most. The words hung in the air of my living room, and I felt my friend's attention intensify. Maya squeezed my arm again, this time more gently. That was beautiful, Sarah, she whispered. That was real. But I was already bracing myself for the next part. The question about advice for young people pursuing their passions despite pressure to choose more traditional, secure paths. I remembered how Patricia's expression had shifted slightly, recognizing that we'd moved beyond a standard arts interview into something more personal, more revealing. What would you say to other young people who are facing similar pressures? Who have families or communities that don't understand their artistic ambitions? On screen, I watched myself take a breath, choosing my words with the care of someone who knew that the wrong phrasing could cause real damage, real hurt. I'd say that the people who love you might not always understand your path, but that doesn't make your path wrong, I heard myself respond. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is believe in yourself when nobody else will. And sometimes, if you work hard enough and stay true to your vision, if you demonstrate through your actions rather than just your words that your dreams have value, you can change their minds, not always, but sometimes. And that possibility is worth fighting. The camera lingered on my face as I spoke, and I could see something in my own expression that surprised me, a combination of vulnerability and determination that I hadn't realized was so visible, so transparent. The segment continued, and I watched as the focus shifted to my actual work. The screen filled with more of my photographs, each image given time to breathe, to tell its own story. There was Mrs. Washington again, but this time in a different shot, standing in front of the community center with a group of children, all of them holding vegetables they'd grown in the garden. The composition was carefully balanced, the lighting natural but somehow luminous, capturing not just their faces but their sense of pride and accomplishment. Then came brief interviews with some of the people I'd photographed, their voices adding layers to the visual narrative. Mrs. Washington appeared on camera, her gray hair neatly braided, wearing the emerald green dress she reserved for special occasions. Sarah sees us, she said simply, her voice carrying the authority of her 73 years. Not what people think we are, not what the news usually shows about our neighborhood, but who we really are. She sees our strength, our beauty, our dreams for our children. That's rare. That's special. The program also included footage from the community garden, showing residents of all ages working together, sharing knowledge and resources, creating something beautiful and nourishing in what had once been an empty lot. The camera captured details I'd tried to convey in my still photography. The careful way elderly hands guided young ones in planting seeds. The laughter that erupted when someone accidentally sprayed themselves with the garden hose. The quiet pride in faces as people surveyed the fruits of their collective labor. As the segment drew to a close, Patricia appeared on screen one final time, the photo montage continuing as background to her closing remarks. Sarah Richardson's work reminds us that every neighborhood, Every community has stories worth telling and people worth celebrating. Her photographs don't just document, they reveal. They challenge us to look beyond our assumptions and see the dignity, creativity, and resilience that exist in every corner of our city. You can see more of Sarah's work at several galleries around Chicago. And her community garden project continues to grow, now in its second year of bringing neighbors together through the shared joy of creating something beautiful. As the segment ended and the program transitioned to sports with highlights from the Cubs' latest victory, my phone immediately exploded with activity. Calls and texts poured in faster than I could process them. Maya hugged me tightly, her excitement infectious. James from the magazine was already talking about follow-up stories and potential exhibitions. Lisa and Derek were discussing how they could support similar community engagement through their own photography projects. The room filled with congratulations and celebratory chatter, everyone talking over each other in their enthusiasm. But through it all, I found myself listening for one specific ringtone, watching for one particular name to appear on my phone screen. Still nothing from my father. The celebration continued around me, but I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching it all from outside myself. The interview had gone better than I dared to hope. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People I respected were telling me I'd represented both myself and my work beautifully. So why did I feel so empty, so incomplete? 20 minutes later, as my guests were gathering their coats and preparing to leave, promising to call me over the weekend to discuss everything in more detail, my phone rang. The sound cut through the ambient chatter, and something about its tone made everyone in the room pause. The caller ID showed a number I didn't immediately recognize, but there was something familiar about the area code. Something made me answer, even though I normally let unknown numbers go to voicemail. Hello? Sarah, this is your father. My heart stopped completely. The room around me faded away Maya's concerned expression. James halfway into his jacket, Lisa and Derek paused in their conversation about weekend plans. Everything narrowed to my father's voice coming through the phone speaker, slightly hollow, with the distinctive sound quality of a hands-free car system. Dad? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. I just watched your interview, he said, and there was something different in his voice, something I couldn't quite identify. Quieter than usual, less certain. I was working late at the office, you know how it is on Fridays? Trying to clear my desk before the weekend, and Mrs. Henderson, the office manager, mentioned that you were going to be on the Channel 7 news tonight. She said her daughter had seen something about it on social media. I gestured frantically to Maya that I needed privacy, stepping quickly toward my small balcony that overlooked Lincoln Park. The April evening was cool but not cold. The kind of spring weather that promised summer wasn't far away. The city lights were beginning to twinkle as darkness settled over Chicago, the sky transitioning from deep blue to black above the lake. What do you think? I asked, surprised by how much his opinion still mattered to me after 3 years of strained conversations and careful distance. There was a long pause, filled with the ambient sound of traffic and the hum of his car's air conditioning. I could picture him in his silver Accord, probably pulled over in some parking lot, the dashboard lights illuminating his face as he struggled with words that didn't come easily to him. Sarah, he finally said, I owe you an apology. The words hit me like a physical shock, making me grip the balcony railing for support. In my entire 26 years of life, through childhood mistakes and teenage rebellions, through college choices he'd questioned and career decisions he'd opposed, I couldn't remember my father ever apologizing to me for anything substantial. Small things, yes, being late to a school play, forgetting to pick up something I'd asked for. But never for anything that mattered, anything that had caused real hurt. I've been sitting in this parking lot for the last 20 minutes, he continued, his voice growing steadier as he found his rhythm, watching that interview over and over on my phone. And I realized something that I should have understood a long time ago. When you talked about being underestimated, about people not believing in your dreams, about having to believe in yourself when nobody else will you were talking about. Weren't you? Tears started forming in my eyes, blurring the city lights below into soft halos of gold and white. Dad. No, let me say this. I need to say this. His voice was firm now, carrying the same authority he used in court, but gentler, more vulnerable. I've spent the last 3 years thinking I was protecting you, thinking I was being realistic about your chances in a difficult, unpredictable industry, thinking I was saving you from the kind of disappointment and financial instability that I was so afraid of when I was your age. But what I was really doing was projecting my own fears onto your dreams. I was treating your passion like it was my failure waiting to happen. I could hear the sounds of Chicago's evening rush hour in the background, horns honking, sirens in the distance, the rumble of buses and trucks navigating the city streets. But my father's voice cut through all of it, clear and present and more honest than I had ever heard it. When I came to this country 32 years ago, I was absolutely terrified of failure, he continued. Terrified of not being able to provide for my family, terrified of not living up to this mythical American dream that everyone talked about but nobody really explained how to achieve. So I chose the safest path I could find: law school, a stable, firm, predictable income, conventional success. And it worked for me. It gave us the house in Oak Park, it paid for your college education, it provided security and comfort. But that doesn't mean it's the right path for everyone. That doesn't mean it's the right path for you. Dad, you don't have to... Yes, I do. Sarah, I absolutely do. His voice cracked slightly, and I realized he was crying too. Watching you on television tonight, seeing the respect in that interviewer's voice when she talked about your work, seeing those photographs and hearing those people talk about how you've affected their lives, I realized that you didn't just choose a different path from mine. You chose a better path, a braver path, a path that actually makes the world a little bit better instead of just making your bank account a little bit bigger. Now I was openly sobbing, standing on my balcony overlooking the city where I'd struggled for so long to prove myself, where I'd questioned my choices countless times, where I'd wondered if my father might be right about the impracticality of artistic dreams. Your mother would be so incredibly proud of you, he said, and his voice broke completely on the words. She'd be proud that you didn't give up your art the way she did when we got married. She'd be proud that you had the courage she couldn't find, the courage I never encouraged her to develop. She gave up her art for you, for our family, I said through my tears. She made that choice because she loved us. And it was the wrong choice. I see that now, Sarah. I see it so clearly. The pain in his voice was raw, decades of regret condensed into a few sentences. I should have supported her dreams instead of dismissing them as hobbies. I should have found a way to make both of our dreams work. Should have believed that we could build a life that had room for both security and creativity. Instead, I convinced her and myself that dreams were luxuries we couldn't afford, that art was something you did after you'd taken care of all the real responsibilities. The city hummed below us, millions of people pursuing their own versions of success and happiness, each carrying their own dreams and fears and compromises. I thought about my mother's hidden paintings stored in the basement, canvases she'd never shown anyone but me, works of beauty and emotion that the world would never see, because she'd been convinced they weren't valuable enough to pursue. I thought about all the conversations with my father that had ended in disappointment and tension. All the times I'd wondered if I was being foolish or brave, impractical, or visionary. I don't want to make the same mistake with you that I made. With her, he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I don't want to be the reason you doubt yourself, the voice in your head that questions whether your dreams are worth pursuing. Because tonight, watching you talk about your work with such passion and intelligence, seeing the way you talk about the people whose stories you tell, understanding the impact you're having on your community. Sarah, I've never been prouder of anyone in my entire life. The words I'd been waiting to hear my entire life, finally spoken. Not just acknowledgement, but pride. Not just acceptance, but celebration. I love you, Dad, I whispered into the phone, the words carrying 3 years of distance and hurt and hope. I love you too, Sarah, more than I've ever been able to show you. And I'm proud of you. Not just for the success, not just because you were on television tonight, but for the courage it took to keep going when I wasn't supporting you the way I should have been, for believing in yourself when I failed to believe in you, for becoming the artist and the person your mother always knew you could be. After we hung up, I remained on my balcony for a long time, watching the city lights and processing what had just happened. The interview had been seen by thousands of people across Chicago, had generated more positive response than I'd dared to imagine, had opened doors that might lead to opportunities I'd only dreamed of. But somehow, none of that had felt complete. Without this conversation, without my father's voice telling me that he finally understood, finally saw the value in what I'd chosen to do with my life, my phone buzzed with another notification. And I looked down to see a text message from my father. I recorded the interview on the DVR, going to watch it again with your mother's photo next to me. So incredibly proud of my daughter, the artist. Love, Dad. For the first time in my adult life, I felt complete. Not because I'd achieved some external measure of success, but because the two most important parts of my identity, the daughter who loved her family and the artist who needed to create, were finally, beautifully, whole. 3 weeks later, I was meticulously setting up my camera equipment for a photo shoot at Millennium Park, adjusting the angles to capture the perfect interplay between the architectural curves of the J. Pritzker Pavilion and the natural morning light filtering through the Chicago skyline. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and the distant aroma of coffee from nearby vendors. I was completely absorbed in my work, checking and rechecking my light meter readings, when my phone rang with an insistent buzz that cut through my concentration. The caller ID showed my father's name, and I felt that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. It was barely past 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, something that never happened unless there was a genuine emergency. In all my 32 years, I could count on one hand the number of times he'd call me during his sacred work hours. Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. His voice came through the speaker, but there was something different about his tone. Instead of the usual formal distance, there was an energy I hadn't heard in years, and almost boyish excitement that reminded me of how he used to sound when I was very young and he'd surprise me with impromptu trips to the zoo or the children's museum. Just work, Dad. What's going on? You sound excited. I set down my camera and walked a few steps away from my equipment, suddenly giving him my full attention. I am excited, Sarah, I really am. He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath, as if he was gathering courage. I've been doing some serious thinking since your interview aired 3 weeks ago, and I want to show you something. Something important. Are you free for dinner tonight? Maybe we could meet at that little Italian place on Rush Street, Piccolo Sogno. My heart skipped a beat. Piccolo Sogno was expensive, the kind of upscale establishment where my father took his most important clients when he needed to impress them or celebrate major victories. The dining room with its warm lighting, hand-painted murals, and servers who knew every regular by name. The fact that he was suggesting it for what he'd called a casual dinner with me felt monumentally significant, like a seismic shift in the geography of our relationship. Of course, Dad. Is everything okay? You're not sick, are you? The worry crept into my voice before I could stop it. Everything's wonderful, Sarah, better than it's been in a very long time. His voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard since before. My mother died. I'll see you at 7, and Sarah? We're something nice. This is a celebration. I spent the rest of the day completely distracted, mechanically going through the motions of my photo shoot while my mind raced with possibilities. What could my father possibly want to celebrate? Since that night 3 weeks ago when he'd called after my television interview. The night when he'd actually used the word proud in reference to me for the first time in my adult life. Our relationship had undergone a transformation that still left me slightly breathless. He'd started asking detailed questions about my assignments, requesting copies of my published work to share with colleagues, and even mentioning my career to his golf partners and fellow attorneys, something he'd never done before. Last week, he'd actually asked me to explain the technical aspects of a particularly challenging low-light photograph I'd taken of a jazz performance in Grant Park. He'd listened intently, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand my craft. That evening, I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, my stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. I'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a navy blue dress that my mother had always said brought out my eyes. As I approached the hostess stand, I spotted my father already seated at a quiet corner table near the window overlooking the twinkling lights of the city. He stood to greet me, another new development in our evolving relationship, and enveloped me in a hug that lasted several seconds longer than his usual polite embrace. On the pristine white tablecloth beside his water glass sat an unmarked manila envelope, thick and substantial, its presence somehow commanding attention despite its plain appearance. "You look beautiful, Sarah. Happy, genuinely happy." His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, and I noticed he was wearing the navy tie I'd given him for his birthday 2 years ago, a gift I'd assumed he'd never worn. I did feel happy, genuinely happy for the first time in years. The success of the television interview had opened doors I'd only dreamed of walking through. Chicago Life magazine had assigned me to document the painstaking restoration of a historic theater in Bronzeville, a project that would likely take months and result in a major feature story. 3 other publications had reached out with potential assignments, and a local gallery owner had even inquired about representing my work. More importantly, for the first time since my teenage years, I felt like my father and I were actually connecting as adults, as equals. "I feel good, Dad. Really good. Things are finally coming together professionally and personally too." I gestured between us. "This us talking, really talking, it means everything to me. I can see that transformation in you. You have that confidence now, the kind that comes from knowing you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing with your life. It's the same look your mother used to get when she was painting something that excited her." The mention of my mother caught me off guard. For years after her death, he'd barely spoken her name, as if saying it aloud might conjure too much pain. Now he was invoking her memory naturally, without the sharp edge of grief that used to accompany any reference to her. We ordered dinner osso buco for him, wild mushroom risotto for me, and conversation flowed with an ease that felt both thrilling and slightly surreal. He asked detailed questions about my current projects, offered surprisingly insightful advice about the business aspects of freelance work, and even shared stories about some of his most challenging legal cases that required creative problem-solving approaches. "You know," he said, twirling pasta around his fork with the precision he brought to everything, "I've been thinking about creativity in the law. The best attorneys aren't just logical, they're artists in their own way. They see angles. Others miss, craft arguments that are both sound and elegant. I never really understood that connection before." "Dad," I finally said as we were finishing our main courses, my curiosity overwhelming my patience, "what's in the envelope? You've been glancing at it all evening."
He set down his fork and looked at me for a long moment, his expression shifting.
From casual dinner conversation to something deeper, more vulnerable. That genuine, warm smile I remembered from my childhood, from before everything became complicated by expectations and disappointments, and the weight of unspoken grief spread across his face. "Your mother's paintings." The words hit me like a physical force. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the gentle hum of restaurant conversation around us. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at them. Every brushstroke reminded me of everything she'd given up when she married me. Everything I'd convinced her she couldn't have. His voice grew thick with emotion. "So I stored them in my office, in a closet behind my law books, where I wouldn't have to see them every day, where they couldn't ambush me with memories when I was trying to focus on work." He reached for the envelope with reverent hands, as if it contained something sacred. "But after watching your interview 3 weeks ago, after hearing you talk about art and passion and following your dreams, after realizing how fundamentally wrong I'd been about the value of artistic pursuits, I went to that closet for the first time in 8 years." My breath was coming in shallow gasps as he carefully opened the envelope. "I had them professionally photographed by the best art photographer in the city. I thought you should see them, should know what an incredible artist your mother was." He withdrew a series of high-quality photographs, each one protected by tissue paper. As he laid them out on the table between us, I felt the world shift around me. My mother had been incredibly talented, more talented than I'd ever fully realized from my childhood glimpses of her work. Her paintings showed a mastery of color and emotional depth that took my breath away. There were landscapes of Ireland, where she'd been born, rolling green hills touched with morning mist, ancient stone walls that seemed to hold centuries of stories. There were portraits of people I didn't recognize, an elderly man with knowing eyes, a young woman laughing with her head thrown back, a child sleeping peacefully in a shaft of golden sunlight. And there were abstract pieces that seemed to capture pure emotion, swirls of blue and silver that felt like joy, angular red shapes that pulsed with passionate intensity. She was amazing, I whispered, studying a painting of a woman dancing alone in what looked like an abandoned ballroom. The figure's dress seemed to flow with actual movement, and the joy and freedom in her posture was so palpable I could almost hear the music she was dancing to. Dad, this is extraordinary. She was a real artist. She was. And you know what I can see now, looking at these with fresh eyes?
He leaned forward, his voice intense with discovery.
I can see where your eye for capturing human emotion comes from. The way you photograph people, the way you find that perfect moment that reveals something essential about who they are. You inherited that directly from her artistic vision. Tears were forming in my eyes as I continued to look through the photographs, each one revealing new layers of my mother's talent and vision. Why are you showing me these now, after all these years? Because I want to give them back to you. The actual paintings, all 43 of them.
His voice was steady now, resolved.
They belong with someone who understands their value. Someone who won't hide them away out of fear and misplaced guilt. He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and firm. And because I want to do something else. Something I should have done years ago. I want to help you organize an exhibition. What? The word came out as barely more than a breath. I've been talking to some people, gallery owners, arts patrons, collectors, people I know through the firm who are involved in Chicago's art scene. I want to help you put together a show that features both your photography and your mother's paintings. A 2-generation retrospective that celebrates both of the incredible artists in my family. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. The restaurant seemed to fade around us, the gentle clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation becoming white noise. Dad, that's incredible. But why? Why now? Because I spent 20 years trying to erase your mother's artistic legacy. Convincing myself that if I didn't look at her paintings, if I didn't acknowledge what she'd given up, then somehow the guilt would disappear. His voice cracked slightly. And I've spent the last 3 years trying to discourage your own artistic dreams, terrified that you'd end up disappointed and struggling like I convinced myself she would have. The waiter approached to refill our wine glasses, seeming to sense the gravity of our conversation and retreating quickly after completing his task. I can't undo those mistakes, Sarah. I can't give your mother back the recognition she deserved. And I can't take back the years when I wasn't the supportive father you needed. But I can try to make amends. He paused, looking out the window at the Chicago skyline sparkling in the darkness. There's something else I need to tell you. I've been thinking about my own life lately, about the choices I made and the dreams I put aside. When I first came to America, I wanted to be a journalist. Actually, this revelation hit me like a second shockwave. In all my years, he'd never mentioned having dreams beyond financial security and professional success. I wanted to write about social justice issues, to use words to make the world better. I had this romantic vision of myself as an investigative reporter, uncovering corruption, giving voice to the voiceless.
His smile was rueful.
But I was so afraid of not making it, so terrified of disappointing my parents who'd sacrificed everything to send me here that I chose the safe path instead. Law school, corporate work, steady income, predictable success. But you did make it, Dad. You built something incredible. Your firm is respected throughout the city. I built something successful, he corrected gently. I built something financially rewarding and professionally prestigious. but watching you these past few weeks, seeing how passionate you are about your work, how much genuine joy and fulfillment it brings you. He shook his head. I realize I never built something that made me feel the way your photography makes you feel. I never woke up excited about my work the way you do. Outside the restaurant windows, Chicago's downtown buzzed with evening energy. Young professionals heading to dinner, tourists exploring the magnificent mile, artists and dreamers pursuing their own versions of success. The city felt full of possibility, electric with the dreams of everyone moving through its streets. So, what happens now? I asked, my voice small but hopeful. Now we plan an exhibition that celebrates both of the incredible artists in my family, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. And I try to be the father I should have been all along. The father who supports his daughter's dreams, instead of fearing them. 6 months later, on a crisp October evening that felt like a turning point in my life, the exhibition opened at Morrison Gallery, a prestigious space in River North known for launching the careers of emerging artists. Inherited Vision, 2 generations of Chicago artists, featured 25 of my photographs alongside 15 of my mother's paintings. Each piece carefully selected and professionally mounted. The opening night exceeded every expectation I'd dared to have. The gallery was packed with people from both of our worlds, my colleagues from Chicago Life magazine, photography enthusiasts who'd followed my work, art collectors, and a surprising number of my father's professional network, many of whom were discovering their first serious exposure to contemporary art. I watched my father throughout the evening, marveling at his transformation. He moved through the crowd with obvious pride, introducing people to both my work and my mother's paintings with the enthusiasm of a seasoned gallery owner. I overheard him explaining the technical aspects of one of my photographs to a group of his law partners, using terminology I'd taught him during our recent dinners together. But the moment that mattered most came early in the evening, when the initial rush of guests had settled into smaller conversational groups. I found my father standing alone in front of my mother's painting of the dancing woman, the piece that had taken my breath away that first night at the restaurant. She would have loved this, he said quietly, not turning around but somehow sensing my presence behind him. She would have been so proud to see her work displayed like this, in a real gallery, being appreciated by people who understand art. She would have been proud of you too, I replied, moving to stand beside him, for making this happen, for giving her work the recognition it deserved. He turned to me, and I saw tears in his eyes, something I'd witnessed only once before. At my mother's funeral 8 years ago. Sarah, I need you to know something, and I need you to really hear me. His voice was thick with emotion. When I called you after your interview 3 weeks ago and told you I was proud of you, I meant it completely. But I was also proud of something else that I didn't know how to articulate then. What? I was proud that, despite having a father who didn't support your dreams, despite growing up in a household where art was treated as impractical and dangerous, you pursued your passion anyway. I was proud that you were strong enough and brave enough to believe in yourself when I couldn't believe in you. We stood together in the gallery, surrounded by art that represented not just creativity and talent, but courage and perseverance and the power of dreams realized. The room buzzed with conversation, with people connecting over shared appreciation for beauty and human expression, with the kind of energy that only comes when art successfully bridges the gap between creator and audience. You know what I've learned through all of this? I said, looking around at the faces illuminated by gallery lighting, at strangers who were genuinely moved by our work. Sometimes the people who love us most can't support our dreams, not because they don't believe in us, but because they're afraid for us. They've seen how hard the world can be, and they want to protect us from disappointment and struggle. My father nodded slowly. And sometimes, if we're patient and if we keep working toward our goals despite the lack of support, we can help the people who love us overcome that fear. And sometimes, I added, if we're very lucky, we get the chance to make up for lost time. The exhibition ran for 2 months and was covered by several local media outlets, including a full-page feature in the Chicago Tribune Arts section. But more importantly for me, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in my relationship with my father. He started attending my gallery openings, sharing my work with his colleagues with genuine enthusiasm, and even commissioning me to photograph several high-profile events for his law firm. But the most meaningful change was simpler and more profound than professional support. We started having regular dinners, just the two of us, where we talked about our work, our dreams, our fears, and our memories of my mother. He told me stories about her art that I'd never heard, how she'd painted late at night when she thought no one was watching, how she'd hidden her brushes in the kitchen because she was embarrassed about the mess, how she'd once told him that colors had personalities and emotions of their own. I shared with him the ways her creative spirit had influenced my own work, how I'd unconsciously absorbed her sense of composition and her intuitive understanding of light. We discovered that we both remembered the same details about her, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she'd get paint under her fingernails and forget to wash it off, the way her whole face would light up when she was excited about a new piece. One evening, about a year after the exhibition, we were walking along the lakefront after dinner when he said something that perfectly captured how much our relationship had evolved. "Sarah, I want you to know that when people ask me about my daughter now, I don't tell them you're a photographer who's doing well for herself." I looked at him curiously, wondering where this was leading. "I tell them you're an artist who's changing the way people see the world." Artist, not photographer, not even successful photographer, but artist. The word I'd always hoped he'd use but never dared expect to hear from his lips. "And when they ask me if I'm proud of you," he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction, "I tell them that proud isn't a strong enough word for what I feel. I tell them that you've taught me what courage looks like, and that watching you pursue your dreams has made me a better person." As we walked along Lake Michigan, with the Chicago skyline glittering behind, US like a constellation of possibilities, and the future stretching out ahead like an endless horizon of potential, I realized that sometimes the most important victories aren't the ones the world sees. Sometimes they're the quiet moments when the people we love most finally understand who we really are and why our dreams matter. My father had once said he'd never be proud of me for being a photographer. But he'd been wrong about that, just like I'd been wrong to think his approval was something I could earn through achievement alone. Pride, real pride, comes from understanding. And understanding I'd learned through years of patience and persistence. Sometimes takes time to develop, but when it finally arrives, when it settles into your life like morning light gradually illuminating a room, it's worth every moment of the wait.